Hello, and welcome again to completing your NOS130 labs. My name is Joe Johnson, and I'll be taking us through Lesson 9 Lab. So we're going to go ahead and connect to our virtual machine. I've already done that here. During the exercise, we are going to run a Hyper-V on a client computer so that we can use it to run older applications. So sometimes we need to do that for applications that don't work with Windows 8. We're just going to demonstrate how to create a virtual machine. We're not actually going to install Windows XP. So the first exercise wants us to connect to workstation B and wants us to go ahead and log in. When we log into the lab, we should use the password PA $W0RD. We'll switch over to the desktop. Now remember, we're actually running a virtual machine on the server that we're connected to. So some of the things that we typically do with virtual machines we're not going to be able to do in this lab because we can't create and run a virtual machine inside of a virtual machine. That's not possible. So typically to install Hyper-V on our Windows 8 machine, we would go through the control panel and turn on or off Windows features. But since we run it in a virtual machine, we're going to install it using the command prompt command. We're going to right click this area down here and run an administrative command prompt. And we need to do that so that we can install features or turn on features. The command that we use to add or remove features from Windows 8 is DISM online enable feature name Microsoft Hyper-V-all. We'll go ahead and hit the enter key, and that will actually turn on the Hyper-V feature for us so that we can see the console to look at some of the settings. It's going to ask us if we want to reboot. Typically we want to reboot, and what that'll do is it'll set up the way the computer boots so that it's compatible with Hyper-V. We'll say yes. And our computer will reboot. Once again, make sure you're on workstation member B. Use the same password, PA $W0RD. We'll switch to the desktop and right click. Go to control panel. Click on Programs. Turn Windows features on or off. Click the plus sign next to Hyper-V. Now we can see Hyper-V is installed and the feature is turned on. If you're doing this lab to get the screenshot, you should take the screenshot of this dialog box here. Go ahead and close out of this dialog box and we'll switch back. Once you switch back, we'll scroll over to the other end of the desktop. See, we have some new icons. For this lab, we will choose Hyper-V Manager. That allows me to create, manage, and remove virtual machines from this Windows 8 PC. The very first thing we'll probably always do when we set up a new machine with Hyper-V is set up the virtual switch so that we can tell the computers how we want the virtual machines that we create, how we want them to communicate. So we're going to click on Virtual Switch Manager. When we see this dialog box, notice we have three options. We can create three different types of virtual switches. One is an external switch, one is an internal switch, and one is private. So once we have this dialog box up, we can choose what type of switch we want to create. Create an internal switch. We'll click internal. If we wanted to connect to the internet, we would create an external switch. But for this exercise, we will create an internal switch. We then click Create Virtual Switch, and the machine will create our virtual switch for us. Click OK. And that is the end of exercise 9.1. In exercise 9.2, we're going to actually create a Hyper-V machine. We've installed Hyper-V and created a virtual switch in exercise 9.1. In exercise 9.2, we are going to create a virtual machine. We should click the workstation and the Hyper-V manager, and then click New, Virtual Machine. The Before You Begin page should come up. We'll click Next. It would like us to specify a name for the virtual machine. We're going to call this virtual machine VM1. We'll then click Next. By default, the computer uses 512 megabytes of RAM. Since we don't have that much memory in this virtual machine, it tells us that the maximum number that we can use in this startup memory box is 480. So we'll go ahead and change it to 480. We're also going to select dynamic memory, and then we'll hit the next button. It wants us to know how this virtual machine is going to be connected to the host virtual machine or the other virtual machines. We're going to select the virtual switch that we created in exercise 9.1 and then click Next. It then wants to know how it should set up the storage for the virtual machine. For this particular exercise, we're going to create a new virtual hard disk, and we're going to specify the size of it to be 5 gigabytes. Typically we would use a larger hard drive, but for this exercise we're just going to use 5. If we wanted to, we could also connect to an existing virtual hard drive, or we could leave the storage not configured and configure it later. For this exercise we're going to create a new one. We'll hit Next. The next dialog gives us an option to mount ISO images and install operating systems. We're not going to do that right now. We're going to select Install an operating system later. Click Next, and then click Finish. If you're doing this lab for homework, this is where you should take your screenshot. That is the end of exercise 9.2. In exercise 9.3, we're going to configure the virtual machine settings of the virtual machine we just created. To configure the settings for the VM, we will right-click the virtual machine we would like to configure and click Settings. In the Hardware pane, under the IDE Controller 1, we're going to tell the virtual machine to mount a ISO file and use it as a DVD drive. The way that we do that is we would click on Image File and find the ISO we would like to boot the computer from. In this case, the ISO file that we would like to mount is on server DCA, SVR -DC-A /software. Click Open, and there is the ISO we'd like to mount. We'll click Open. If you are doing this lab for homework, this is where you would do your screenshot. We're going to click OK to close the settings window. The next thing the exercise would like you to do is to create a snapshot. To create a snapshot, we right-click the VM and click Snapshot. Remember, snapshots allow us to take a snapshot of a virtual machine at a certain point in time so that we can go back to it later if we want to. Remember that snapshots take up disk space, so if we don't need the snapshot anymore, we should get rid of it. The way we do that is to right click the VM and say delete snapshot. And that is the end of exercise 9.3. If you want to continue to the lab challenge, it would like you to expand the virtual hard drive for the first VM from 5 gigabytes to 6 gigabytes. The way that we would do that is to use the Edit Disk option in our Hyper-V Manager. The first step is to let the Hyper-V Manager know where the disk is that we would like to edit. We will click Next. We will click Expand, and then change the size of the drive to 6 gigabytes. We click Next, Finish, and that is the end of the lab challenge and the end of the Chapter 9 labs. Thank you for watching, and I will see you in class.